one of the most therapeutic things you can do for someone is have them voluntarily face the things they're afraid of. And most archaic cultures do that with their juvenile males, particularly during initiation. And I think there's good evidence to suggest that that sort of voluntary facing of fear, which is something like acceptance of vulnerability, helps regulate the nervous system.
Justin, a word for you, and then I want to cycle in another email here. Go ahead.
You're talking about male circumcision, or what I call male genital mutilation. That is not trivial.
I'm not talking about that.
Well, that is one example of what, and that's not voluntary. You talk about
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the initiation
let me talk
ritual.
Now. You've said quite a few things in the last 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
You've said two things that are completely contradictory. Okay, you talk about that you're referring to infants, and you talked about referring to young. You said young men. You did say young men.
Yeah,
okay?
But
and you said voluntary.
But
that doesn't go together.
If I'm not talking about infants.
This comes down. Let me try to get a full sentence out before you interrupt.
But you're putting words in his mouth that he says ought not to be there. So what are you trying to?
He did say young people, and
I said young men.
Okay, young men.
And young men are not infants.
Well, young men are not doing something voluntary until they're old enough to choose for themselves. What I think a lot of this comes down to is individualism versus group rights.
Those of you who know me well, you know damn well that I don't agree with everything that George Washington did. I don't agree with everything he did, man. Like slavery comes to mind. I don't agree with his slavery farm. I just don't agree with it, man. However, when he said that Canada is populated by untrustworthy freaks, the old general was right on point when he said it, man. There is no doubt about it. There's no fucking doubt about it. If this show The Agenda, it's a Goliath in Canada. It's a huge cultural institution. All the Canadians watch it. The kids are forced to watch these disgusting, perverted, philosophical discussions about circumcision. It's vintage Canada, man. This is Canada. This is what that country is all about. Canada is kind of like this neighbor you have, and you think that he's a normal guy. You see him mowing the grass, you see him smiling and waving. But when you get closer to him, you see a weird tick in his fucking eye, and he starts explaining to you why Armenians perpetrated 9/11 in a huge conspiracy, and you start to back away slowly. You're just nervous that he will trespass on your territory. And then when you watch carefully, you notice that as he mows his grass, he mumbles to himself. It's Canada, man. That's what it's all about. Like most residents, like most people in America, I really didn't know that much about that country. I saw just the peak of the Canadian iceberg, just the top above the water. But when you go down here in the Canadian dark south, when you dive deep, you realize that there are disturbing things there. They're just disturbing, menacing, and horrible things there in the Canadian dark south. In my career as a YouTube creator, it so happens that I have offered constructive criticism of many Canadian luminaries, of many influence makers hailing from that country. Now, of course, we're talking about constructive criticism of Stéphane Molyneux, Lindsay Shepherd, Jean-François Grippi, and of course the dark professor himself, Jordan Peterson. My homies, my ninjas. Canada is always on my mind. Canada has invaded my life. And ever since I became more and more familiar with that country, it's sort of like a fucking parasite on my throat, dude. It weighs on me, man. It's always around me. It's always in my head. Canada is. I've been losing sleep. I've been waking up with cold sweats, man. I've lost my appetite, dude. A lot of things have been going on. A lot of pressure in my life. Coming from this cancer of Canadianness in my heart. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if it's the voice of my friend or the voice of something else, man. If it's just a voice beamed at me from Canada or something, man, from a tower in Canada. It has been freaking me out, man. I haven't been the same. My dude, I slipped, all right? I slipped. I killed a little whore, okay? I needed to release the pressure. I didn't want to do it. I'm not a sexist, all right, man? I just preyed on her because she was female and weak, all right, man? this is what happened, okay? I don't even want to go into what happened. Now, in the tri-state area, I'm known as the Maple Leaf Killer because I arranged her innards, arranged her guts in a maple leaf, dude. This is what happened. I got away quickly from there. And I have to say that everything is free and clear, my man, because what happened is that I went to a YMCA and I saw a Puerto Rican guy and I offered him a blowjob he couldn't refuse, okay? Dude, guess who walked away with a few pubes in his teeth? Dude, I put it on the body. I put it on the body, nobody will ever link me to it, okay? And now the Puerto Rican will never admit to what happened because they're very homophobic on that island and he doesn't want to be known as a fruit. I don't approve of it, but I capitalized on it in order to get away from this crime. It will probably never happen again unless I watch another Stefan Molyneux video, which is something I'm currently avoiding.
Hey, oh, Daddy needs some blood. I need some blood for my moral posterity. Where are the young?
And my dude, I'm not a dummy, dude. When I put those pubes on her decaying body, I remembered that A I got in arts and crafts at junior high. Dude, nowadays I spend most of my time communicating with the police and authorities through a cryptic code made out of emojis, all right? I try to spell my address in every communique, but I keep forgetting what my fucking code is. Nobody knows what's going on, dude. On the one hand, I kind of want to get caught, but I think my dark self doesn't want to get caught, or maybe like baby Jesus archetype wants me to get caught, and I'm doing the alpha lobster posture, and I don't know where this whole thing is leading me. Only Jordan Peterson can figure out what's going on in my confused soul.
When it comes to this serious business of sex, women will choose a testosterone-charged world wrecker most of the time. What then is a sensible girl to do?
And this is precisely the reason why in my free time, when I'm not occupied by the emoji code, I spend my time watching Canadian television, dude. And of course, the biggest show on there, the real Canadian Goliath, is this show, The Agenda, with hosted by the Keebler elf, Steve Paikin. All right. Now, this show, The Agenda, was a big hangout for Jordan Peterson. When Jordan Peterson was just a larva of wisdom, man. When he was, to use the archetypes from a Disney movie, The Sleeping Beauty, Jordan Peterson was that sleeping beauty, man, waiting for that prince of binary gender pronouns to give him a kiss on the lips, a heterosexual kiss, paradoxically, because we all have the male and the female inside of us. The prince would only kiss Peterson's male side, all right? And now he has awakened and to the world of Patreon and YouTube celebrity and stuff. But back then, he would come on The Agenda and look borderline homeless, and he would spew his bullshit. And the Keebler elf Paikin would listen up carefully. And presumably, nobody would watch this shit. And it is in that vintage Peterson, that old school Peterson, maybe the humble Peterson, whatever, is the one that we're gonna encounter today. We're gonna watch this insane program with fucking insane Canadians in it, and that will ramble on incoherently toward Joseph Stalin when Jordan Peterson is in fact gonna say something so utterly insane that I could not help but make a video about it. All right, man, so this is what we're going to do right now.
You may know Arthur Brooks, the social scientist. I think he just got...
Pretend I don't.
Okay.
Right,
I think he just took over at the American Enterprise Institute. He argues quite compellingly with lots of information that in the aggregate, religious people are happier than non-religious people.
Oh, yeah. No,
and he's got the data to prove it.
Oh, I don't have any argument with that at all. I mean, happiness in the sense of distress. I mean, one of my television series, I went around West Virginia, where they did the snake biting thing. You know, they dance.
In West Virginia, the snake doesn't bite you. you bite the snake. I'm pretty sure that biting the snake is not a part of their Christian ritual, man. You're very ditzy, dude. You're very all over the place, man, with that shit. I mean, they kind of dance with the snake and shit, and being bit by the snake should not be a part of their agenda, part of what's going on, dude. But it would be pretty sweet if they just kind of gathered around and bit the snake.
West Virginia, where they did the snake biting thing, you know, they don't say.
But I guess you might, aside from that strange comment, you might also know a graphic, you might also notice a graphic in the stupid program that says atheist bus. Atheist bus. Now it's just the magical land of Canada, you know, different buses just choose their, you know, prospective beliefs, you know, some buses are kind of interested in Buddhism but aren't ready to commit, you know. They're just different buses in Canada holding different beliefs, dude. Yeah, but actually the stupid topic of this discussion is an advertising campaign by atheists that appeared on buses, okay? So this is what's going on with this atheist bus graphic that looks profoundly unhinged.
And actually there are studies that show this weird sect, I mean, it is by any standards, including of all Christian churches in the US, but they are actually less neurotic and less worried because they do believe in God will save him. They dance with the snakes and do all this stuff.
I wanted to say something about those snake handlers. I know a professor at the University of Tennessee named Ralph Hood, who's probably the world's leading authority on the psychology of religion, and he spent a lot of time interviewing and dealing with those snake handlers. And they're very interesting people in many ways because they say, for example, well, you know, when you go to church, nothing necessarily happens, but when I go to church, I don't know whether I'm going to come out alive or not. And they're not stupid.
Since this topic of snake handlers in America has been brought up in this agenda program, allow me my 2 fucking cents. I'll be real quick, all right? I'm sort of with Dr. Peterson on this one, in a sense that generally speaking, I must confess, dude, I do have a very low opinion of American Christianity, like specifically the evangelicals. I don't know if you've ever driven around their churches, but it looks like a huge warehouse. It just looks like a huge, gigantic, like some sort of an installation for grain, for storing grain or something. Their churches are completely devoid of any aesthetic, of any soulfulness. They're just pretty hollow. And if you go inside the church, it's just a fucking, it's just, I don't know, it's just a storage of platitudes and affirmations of dull bourgeois lives and conservative politics. I don't fucking have anything against any of this, but it's just so kind of, so devoid of anything higher, of any kind of the better angels of religion, I guess. I do fucking have old school bias toward Orthodox Christians and the Catholics, and I think fucking Peterson does as well, man. I think he does as well. Because, you know, those churches were supported by the state, they had a monopoly, and so by definition it's not in their DNA to be this commercial, to be this sort of hollow and just operate like a fucking McDonald's franchise. It's just not in their DNA. Not that they don't try to make money or that they're great people or anything, but, you know, I like the monastic tradition. I think it's important. I know it's not in the Bible, but there's something to it that I like as a former Buddhist. I like the monastic tradition, and Protestants obviously don't have it. Like my friend is a computer programmer, and he worked for this company that did a contract for one of these huge churches, and they literally have invisible sensors by which they measure when people leave during a sermon. I mean, they literally have something like YouTube analytics. I mean, it's just a huge fucking business in the way that old churches just can't replicate. And that's why I fucking despise them to a degree. I'm sorry. I'm very prejudiced. I apologize. These are my beliefs, all right? It's my fucking channel. I say what the fuck I want. Whereas these crazy snake handlers, they're an authentic, insane American Christian traditions. I haven't heard of anything like this anywhere fucking else. They just found this one verse in the Bible that says, my disciples will handle the serpents or something. And that's what they do. They go into this trance and they hold these serpents, and it's actually illegal. So they're borderline underground churches. And they're just like these small churches where people come in there and they're into that shit. And I think that that's fucking awesome. I think that's fucking awesome. There's something very like pagan about it, very tribal, like this a constant presence of danger that Jordan Peterson's outlined. And this isn't some sort of a cynical atheist stuff of let evolution take its course. A lot of them do die doing it, but I do fucking find it admirable. Like, there is no way to turn this insane shit into a soulless megachurch. It's just this intimate setting, an intimate kind of moment of group insanity. Maybe you like animals and you're like, oh, the fucking snake is traumatized. I don't fucking know, dude. It's a very strange animal. It's a very primitive reptile. Like, what's going on when it's being held and like shaken by primates? I mean, sometimes they obviously get pissed off and bite and kill people, but maybe they're fine with it, okay? Maybe they're fine with it.
Happiness, unfortunately, isn't the only criterion that you can measure it by.
Pretty big one, though, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Not
because
necessarily?
it's happiness for whom? I mean, you could, for example, before the abolition of slavery, if you owned a plantation, you were probably very happy. So merely one group being intensely happy is undoubted, but not necessarily the criterion. I would never even debate this subject if it were not for the fact that people in the human race are so ready to kill each other because of a concrete belief in God. So tragically, human beings are programmed to take cudgels up and swords up in the name of what they believe in. That's the problem, not anything else.
So, Jordan and, all right, Kathy, then Jordan.
So what God was Stalin killing 30 million people in the name of?
I don't know. What makes the subtitle of My Little Pony be Friendship is Magic? Like, why does that exist? It's as irrelevant to what he was saying as what this lady said. I mean, fuck it. It's just such a tried argument. I'm just not even gonna address it because man, listen to this shit. Like, these two things are not mutually exclusive. The fact that violence can be interlinked with religious belief is in no way contradicts the idea that it could be interlinked with another belief system like communism. But since the name of Comrade Stalin, the father of all the Soviet people, has been brought up in this context, let me tell you my favorite story about Stalin and religion. And what happened was Stalin and the communists completely took over the Russian Orthodox Church, and it was really kind of a hollow puppet church to them. Nevertheless, the Patriarch of Russia hasn't met Stalin that often. It was a very rare occasions that they would meet. And on this instance, Stalin invited the Patriarch to the Kremlin to, I believe, discuss the church's action during World War II. How can they help out, or what they're supposed to do? Because Stalin has liberalized somewhat, by Soviet standards, religious belief during World War II to have an additional motivator for the people to repel the Fritzes. And at this time, even when Stalin made his first address to the nation, after it was clear that the Nazis have invaded the Soviet Union, Stalin did not address people as comrades. In fact, he used brothers and sisters, a traditional Christian greeting. And so the Patriarch was setting out to meet the Generalissimo, meet the El Jefe of the communists of the world, and he was a little nervous. He was very nervous about putting on his religious garb. After all, it implies a certain connection to God, a certain authority, a certain special authority. And he was very nervous. He wasn't sure if he was going to wear civilian clothes or his religious garb. And wisely, he has chosen civilian garb. He just came in there like another dude, another comrade, you know, just there to see the general secretary. And when Stalin saw this, he smiled, you know, perhaps with his pipe with cheap tobacco, and says, I guess you're afraid of me more than you are afraid of him. Yeah, no shit, man, because one exists and the other one doesn't.
Important point, a really seriously important point. Stalin did undoubtedly kill some people because they were religious. Most of the people that Stalin killed, and I have read the books, I promise you, were not actually killed in the name of atheism.
No, you're missing my point.
No.
He was an atheist.
No, I know.
And he was killing people in the name of atheistic communism.
No,
My homies, today we commemorate the passing, the killing of Leon Trotsky, who was killed in the name of atheistic communism, as opposed to all the people who were killed in the name of theistic communism. Now this is goofy. This is like prime goof rib, as we like to say on this channel. This woman is kind of somewhat of a crazy broad, I would say. Just very, like, later on in this program, she'd say that Obama is a Marxist. I mean, she really should move over here to America, where she would really fit much closer. But let me say this. The reason that communists kill so many people, communist government, is one reason only, and that is because they believe themselves to be the masters of history. They believe themselves to be the vanguard of history. And with all this bullshit where everybody and their mother is called a Marxist because they don't toe the conservative line, nobody actually fucking knows what communism is, because dipshits like this woman like call Obama a Marxist. Fucking A, disagree with Obama. He's not a fucking Marxist. He took a fucking ton of money from Wall Street. Marxism has become a pointless fucking boogeyman, a fucking cultural Marxist. It's just like slap Marxism on fucking anything. You don't like fucking Wendy's or something, fucking call it Marxist. A Marxist fast food chain. The word has become meaningless. But this is what communists believed. They believed that communism was inevitable. It was a part of the natural progress of history. That there were continuous class struggles until they would resolve themselves in a communist state of being, in a kind of a communist utopia of the mind, where the whole kind of concept of private property would dissipate from our minds like a fucking dirty Kleenex in a toilet bowl. This is what they believed. And if you believe yourself to be the masters of history, the anointed vanguard of progress, then why have pluralism? It fits naturally with the dictatorship of the proletariat that Lenin has announced. Whether Marx would have liked it or not is of no consequences, because that's the ideology that he gave birth to. And that gave legitimacy to Stalin's purges, etc., gave ideological legitimacy to it, because those people were not just against the government, they were against history itself, they were against progress itself, and they could be nothing else than traitors and one-dimensional evildoers. And that was the ideological justification. But aside from that, Stalin just killed because he fucking killed. You know, it's like, why do serial killers enjoy having sex with a dying woman? Like, why did Ted Bundy enjoy doing it? You know, like fucking strangling a woman and having anal sex with her as she was passing out into death. Well, because it was in his nature. And Stalin was just a ruthless fuck, an empire builder. Why did he kill most of the communist, most of the Bolshevik upper ranks? Because they potentially posed a threat to him, because he was fucking paranoid. Nobody killed more fucking communists than Stalin. And that's something worth remembering. And fucking atheists had nothing to do with it whatsoever. It's just one aspect of the Marxist ideology, but it's not at its bloody tip.
Disagree with that latter bit completely. It's like saying Hitler was a vegetarian and therefore millions of people died in the name of vegetarianism. He was a vegetarian. the slaughters and the deaths that he caused were not in the name or the cause of vegetarianism. It is very complicated to work out exactly what Stalin was doing other than...
Not to me.
Yeah, not to you, of course, because your whole belief system could fit in the pixels of the early Donkey Kong arcade game. I mean, you're a really simple lady. Everything is fucking straight and narrow for you. You should go with the snake handlers and introduce a little fucking complexity into your life, you know, a kind of threat of death to kind of purge you from your simplistic kind of middle-class mediocrity. This is who this woman is. Obama is a Marxist, and she's a fucking moron. And humanity would luck out if a snake would bite her. I'm just kidding, okay? Maybe not a lethal bite.
Well, actually, yes, you're right. The power structure was an absolute pyramid. But it certainly wasn't killing people because they were atheists as opposed to theists. That wasn't the issue.
So
No,
when,
he was killing people because, as a rational man, his conclusion that life was so unbearable it should be wiped out. You know, you guys who are in, hang on a second. You guys who are into, you know, rational thinking, forget all the time that rational thinking can go in a variety of directions. It depends on your initial presuppositions. If you believe that life is worth living, which, by the way, under some conditions is highly debatable, you're going to come up with a pretty optimistic conclusion. But if you've looked at life and you think that the suffering of most people is unbearable and that life is evil, which is what Stalin thought, you have no problems whatsoever mobilizing everything you can to kill as many people as you can.
Jordan Peterson is just an amazing guy. He really is one of a kind. I mean, who could come up with some shit like that? He really thinks outside of the box. I mean, fucking Professor Peterson, the Dark Professor, he lives in some sort of an amazing, sinister Disney movie. I mean, his interpretations and his views of history are fucking out of this world, man. Like, there's no historian who believes any of what he just said. Now, remember, I don't know if you've been following this channel, but I did a video. The Peterson is in your mind, mein Führer. The Peterson is there, dude. And that video was Jordan Peterson gives Hitler some advice. And with some gesticulation, with some creative movements of his hands that I should aspire to, because mine are just look like fucking two dinosaur fucking limbs, you know, those tiny T-Rex paws, you know. But Peterson, he really goes all over the place. And Jordan Peterson told Adolf in the past that he was really goofy because he should have killed the gypsies, killed the Jews after the war, and that he lost the war because of this.
So here's what you should have done if you were a Nazi and you wanted to win the war. You should have enslaved the Jews and the gypsies and had them work, right? You should have had them work for the benefit of the victory, and then if you wanted to, you liquidate them afterwards. That's the logical thing to do if you want to win. And we assume that Hitler wanted to win. But that's not a very intelligent assumption. Why would you assume that?
But even going deeper, Jordan Peterson has said that Adolf Hitler didn't want to win the war. He didn't really want to win the war, he just liked the chaos. He was addicted to chaos, he was an archetypal drama queen who didn't want to win the war. So that's one amazing piece of the 20th century puzzle that Hitler really unconsciously wanted Germany to lose, I guess, or it didn't matter to him. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But now there's another insane piece in Peterson's demented puzzle, and that's just that Stalin was a kind of almost like a benevolent nurse of death. You know, there are these like nurses who kill elderly patients secretly in order to spare their suffering and exercise some power. And Stalin is kind of like that. He said, life in Poland is unbearable. Life in Poland is unbearable, and so I'm just going to execute thousands of Polish officers and officials and the elite of the Polish society who could create could create resistance to Soviet domination. I'm just going to do it because life in Poland is unbearable and life in general is a bummer. And I'm going to, as a rational man, I'm going to do those people a favor. I'm going to just execute them. And that's what Stalin did. That's what Stalin did. there was a nation within the Soviet Union, and which is today part of Russia, even though there were two bloody wars where they tried to secede, and that's Chechnya. Chechnya is a small Muslim nation. Today it's around 1 million people, but it was always rebellious and never liked to be a part of the Russian sphere of influence, a part of the Russian Empire, and later the Soviet Union. And then during the 1940s, they rebelled against the Soviet Union. They tried to separate from the Soviet Union. This was a very ballsy thing to do because they were tiny. At that point in history, there were probably like 500,000 of them, and they were challenging the Soviet behemoth. And the Germans tried to take advantage of it, and while the Chechens at the time, well, some of the Chechens who rebelled may have welcomed the weakening of the Soviet Union through the German invasion. On the other hand, they didn't really trust each other because they wanted an independent Chechnya, and the Germans wanted its soil, and they didn't want an independent Chechnya, so they didn't trust each other, but there was some level of cooperation or mutual non-aggression between the Germans and the Chechens. So when the Soviet Union won the war, it also won the bloody struggle with the Chechens. And Stalin had a simple solution to this struggle. The Chechens were traitors, and he took more or less the whole population and deported them to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and basically emptied out much of this land. Now, during this process, thousands of people died, but according to Peterson, this was just because Stalin, as a rational man, he saw life in Chechnya as unbearable and decided to transfer them to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan for a better life, or maybe to kill them because life was unbearable. It makes no fucking sense. To Stalin, Stalin was one of the most successful rulers in the 20th century, and one of the most successful imperialists in the history of the world. And if you look at Stalin's success, you have to imagine that the world is like a video game, like a game of Risk, where you take over territory, and where humans are just a resource. And that's what humans were effectively for Stalin. They were just a fucking resource that he moved around strategically. But that doesn't mean that he had some sort of a existential dark philosophy. In fact, he wanted more humans. After World War II, Stalin, like this broad, this crazy right-wing woman brought up Stalin being an atheist. Well, Stalin was also pro-life, because after World War II, with the depleted resource of humanity, it was time for Soviet women to replenish the population. And so abortion was banned. He was pro-life. And he was pro-life as, within the Soviet pyramid, all right, within the fucking pyramid. But to say what Peterson says, there's just no fucking evidence for it. He just pulled it out of his ass.
And if you don't have any faith, in an ultimate authority that says essentially that life is sacred, what's to stop you from doing that?
But if
the
you
fact
have-
that
but
you
if you
have
have
good
belief-
impulses.
It's called morality.
Yeah, where does that come from?
Well,
Where does that come from? Where does it come from? My dude, we're social animals, we're mammals. They're a bunch of pack animals, a bunch of mammals who don't randomly kill each other. It's, a level of cooperation is in our DNA, as well as the level of tribalism.
Stalin and I differed in terms of morality. I would
Why?
actually, why?
Yeah, why?
Well, Dr. Peterson, I was not born a son of abusive Georgian fucking shoemaker, Peterson, man. There were a lot of things that separated me from Stalin. I did not have a dispiriting experience in a Georgian oppressive seminary, man. I did not live in the Russian Empire where there was a Darwinian struggle for power. These are a few reasons why I am not Joseph Stalin.
Why?
Yeah, why?
You're being very rude, Jordan. You're being very rude indeed.
oh, bad boy Peterson is not gonna take the spanking. He'll show his fucking attitude. You know, he's gonna hang out by the side of the school and smoke a cigarette and then maybe kick your ass or maybe throw a fucking lobster claw your way, man. You better ease it, man. Jordan Peterson is not being naughty. He's asking profound fucking questions that a lot of idiots will respond to.
My morality is, as it were, on display simply on the way I actually choose to live my life. And I did emigrate to Canada out of choice. And I hope that Canada hasn't.
Well, and I know
regretted
you
yet.
deal with very difficult things.
Yes, I do.
I know that.
Now, I have no idea where this emo turn, this kind of a sudden sensitive turnaround by Professor Peterson, where that came from. Now, I guess I could Google this guy and find out, but I try to pick up my phone to Google him and see the struggles of his life, but there is a gravitational pull of not giving a shit that kind of pulls my fucking hands back, as if I was like fucking Pinocchio in the early moments of construction.
You deal with very difficult things.
Yes, I do.
I know that.
And I'm not Stalin. I'm not Stalin. And
Guys, dudes, we figured it out together with Jordan Peterson. Whoever that guy is, one thing he's not is Joseph Stalin, otherwise known as Joseph Drugashvili. My dudes, he's not Stalin, dude. Maybe he's Trotsky, but probably not, man. Okay? How could he have morality without God? Who gives a shit at this point?